Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3 is coming soon, and I'm terrified. Who doesn't love Final Fantasy VII Remake and Rebirth? Well, quite a few people actually, but that's besides the point. I, for one, absolutely adore them. I find it incredible how much they've fleshed out the story, adding extra layers and context to what I already believed to be one of the greatest tales ever told. I honestly love everything about both of these games, from how existing characters have been redesigned and portrayed, to how interesting brand new individuals have been successfully integrated into the scenario. Seriously, for the most part, the titles are brilliantly written, giving everyone in this unique world a chance to shine. That's without even mentioning the addictive yet tactile new action-based combat mechanics, the nostalgic yet modern art style, and the deep levels of immersion this future trilogy offers. The environments are unique, rich, and scream for exploration. Hell, I even got a kick out of being Chadley's little bitch helper, scouring the countryside to help him gather data. For me personally, at least, these games have more than delivered on the massive levels of hype they promised. The mix of excitement and anxiety I felt leading up to both the releases, where I was concerned that the legacy of the original Final Fantasy VII could be tarnished, was completely misplaced, as I now love these games just as much as the first. After waiting for these games to show up for decades, the long wait has been more than worth it. While, like with any game, there are certain aspects that I could nitpick, for the most part, I've been overwhelmingly pleased with both titles. So, as you can probably guess, I was more than eager to experience the next installment. To me, the games are just so bloody good, allowing me to overlook little annoyances that are common with practically all modern games. After all the minor segments like smashing boxes or Tesco Value Rocket League courtesy of Red 13 and the dreaded Shinra Mansion Tour hosted by Kate Sif are just tiny parts of a gargantuan, mostly excellent adventure. That being said, as good as the first two games were, there have been some recent updates that don't sit quite right with me, leaving me slightly concerned that the trilogy may not necessarily finish on the high note we are all bargaining for. So today I would like to air my fears with all of you. I am Lady Decade. Hit that subscribe button, as this is everything we know so far about the next installment in the Final Fantasy VII Remake Trilogy, and why this has me slightly worried and scared. For more than 2 decades, countless gamers longed for the day Square Enix would reimagine one of the most cherished stories in gaming history, revealing what the magical world of Final Fantasy VII could look like with the power of modern technology. Despite teasing us for years, including with a 2005 PlayStation 3 tech demo, 10 years later this pipe dream would become a tangible reality when, during an E3 Sony press conference, Square announced a Final Fantasy VII Remake would really be happening. The announcement featured a cinematic teaser trailer which generated immense excitement and marked the beginning of a highly anticipated project that would reimagine the iconic 1997 game for a new generation. However, just 6 months later, some of that excitement began to fade as anticipation gradually gave way to a sense of anxiety, particularly regarding one statement Square had made. During December 2015's PlayStation Experience event, Square Enix announced that the Final Fantasy VII Remake would be an episodic release, instantly leading to a great deal of confusion and skepticism. Instantly, many took this as a huge blow. After all, how could you not feel uneasy about a departure from the original's single, complete format? Some were worried that breaking the game into episodes could disrupt the narrative flow and alter how the story was experienced. For example, what if Square were planning for key content to be cut, with the prospect of paying full game prices for what might just be small episodes, raising fears of an expensive investment? Let's be fair, trust in episodic models was already shaky due to notorious delays in other games, leaving many uncertain about Square Enix's ability to deliver a complete and satisfying remake while staying true to the original's legacy. I don't know about you, but I was very worried. Fortunately though, Square would provide us with some slightly clearer clarification. In a press release following the event, they would confirm that although the remake would be released in multiple parts, each installment would be comparable in scale to a full-sized game, rather than dozens of micro-games. This episodic approach allowed the developers to expand on the story and the world of the original Final Fantasy VII without having to condense or cut content to fit into a single release. Although still a divisive way of doing things, this was far from many gamers' worst fears. While some saw this design choice as a cash grab, others saw this as the best opportunity to do this story justice. Focusing the entirety of Final Fantasy VII Remake, the first part of the trilogy, on just Midgar and expanding its story, in my opinion, was a brilliant decision that allowed Square Enix to elevate the game's narrative, characters and world building in ways that the original could not. In the 1997 version, Midgar, while iconic, was constrained by technical limitations and primarily served as the prologue to the larger adventure. The remake transforms it into a vibrant living metropolis, complete with intricate neighbourhoods, bustling markets, and a tangible divide between the wealthy elite on the upper plates and the struggling communities below. This reimagining makes it feel like a real dystopian city with its own pulse and personality. A further major strength of the trilogy approach lies in the expanded character development. Focusing on Midgar in Part 1 allowed for a deeper exploration of individuals' backstories, motivations, and relationships. Secondary characters like Jessie, Biggs, and Wedge, who played relatively minor roles in the original game, are now fully realised and central to the emotional core of the story. Their expanded arcs create stronger emotional connections with players and make their fates far more impactful. Meanwhile, the remake gives main characters like Cloud, Tifa, Barrett and Aerith more layers than ever too, providing more nuanced insights into their personalities, struggles and quirks. For example, who knew that Cloud could orgasm from a hand massage? And I'm not talking about the kind that you're thinking of.
Let's start
with the tips.
Give me a good old rub. That's it. Yeah, boy.
Despite being only the first part of a larger story, the Midgar-focused remake is a full experience in its own right. With 30 to 50 hours of gameplay, it offers a satisfying blend of everything that makes the tale of Final Fantasy VII so memorable. Whether you're a fan of the original classic or want to dive into the world of Final Fantasy VII for the very first time, I can't recommend this game enough. Fortunately for all of you lucky people today, Instant Gaming is currently having a Black Friday sale, meaning that using my link, you can get this game along with the excellent Yuffie DLC for 51% cheaper than on Steam. But don't wait, these deals are flying off the shelves and code stock is limited. But fear not, it's Black Friday, so you'll find incredible discounts on tons of other games that you've been eyeing for a while anyway. Whether it's a classic you love or something new for your collection, now's the time to snag them all at unbeatable prices. Click the link below to secure your savings before it's too late, and don't forget to drop a comment sharing the awesome bargains you've scored. A huge thanks to Instant Gaming for sponsoring this video. Happy Black Friday shopping and happy gaming. As for the Final Fantasy VII Remake Trilogy, it's clear from every aspect we have seen so far that the decision to focus on one segment of the original game at a time allowed the developers to polish every part of the story, making the experience feel complete while setting the stage for future installments. Take the Don Corneo and Wall Market section of the game, for example. A sequence many expected would be cut in the remake, given its over-the-top humour, campy tone, and potentially dated elements. Square Enix not only kept the Don Corneo section in Final Fantasy VII Remake, but elevated it into one of the game's standout moments. The expanded Wall Market became a sprawling, neon-lit hub filled with eccentric NPCs and activities, immersing players in its chaotic charm. Cloud's reluctant transformation into a bride was hilariously handled without undermining his character, while Aerith and Tifa's expanded roles added depth and agency, showcasing their personalities, strengthening their camaraderie, and, most importantly, their bougie dresses. Just like the one I am wearing in this video. A heartfelt thank you to my wonderful Patreon backers for making this costume possible. Your support means the world to me, and as a token of my gratitude, I've added a photo sheet featuring this costume to my growing behind-the-scenes Patreon library. It's my way of giving back and sharing something special with all of you who back the channel. If you'd like to check it out, you'll find the links in the description. Thank you again for your amazing support. So now, after providing context about how many of our fears around this trilogy have been alleviated in the past, let's begin to discuss why they are beginning to resurface. On the 21st of November 2024, several articles appeared on the Daily Star's website, of all bloody places. Now, before I go on, let me just say this. You know gaming journalism is going down the toilet when breaking gaming news this important comes from a British tabloid newspaper rather than, say, IGN or Kotaku. But jokes aside, I know which one out of these three brands I would rather trust. It's hardly what anyone would call a reputable news source, more like the bottom of the barrel dregs that prioritise salacious stories. So for them to land an exclusive interview with Naoki Hamaguchi, the director of Rebirth, that's absolutely hilarious in my opinion, but I digress. Regardless of the bizarre source, these exclusive interviews have revealed a plethora of brilliant yet, at times, worrying snippets of information that could certainly set the most ardent Remake and Rebirth fans on edge. So allow me to break down as much of this as I can for you now. The first point I'd like to make concerns the release of DLC, or lack thereof, as far as Final Fantasy VII Rebirth goes thus far. According to the interview, unlike Remake, which was obviously released on the PlayStation 4, Rebirth will not have any DLC to call its own, with at least there not being any planned anyway. Instead, the source states that the development staff are fully focused on completing Part 3 of the trilogy. After all, it is said that the Yuffie DLC, which exists with Remake, wasn't necessarily created to hold fans over while Rebirth was being made. It was mainly created to test how best to work with the PS5, and with the third installment of the trilogy also expected to arrive on the same system, no extensive testing will be required this time around. Speaking of which, the Daily Star all but confirms this, reporting that Square Enix's decision not to produce DLC is to expedite the development of the third part of the Remake Trilogy. Essentially, the team wants to get the third part to fans as soon as possible, and producing DLC would only delay this. Still, many of us really enjoyed the Yuffie DLC, with a lot of people, myself included, agreeing it built on the previous story and allowed us to learn more about Yuffie than ever before, a character we were not even required to play as in the 1997 version of the game, with her existing as an optional unlockable individual we could do with or without. In the interview, Hamaguchi acknowledged the fans' desire for DLC, but pointed out that other fans are more eager for the next installment of the series, stating, "We definitely do hear the desire from fans, the voices out there that want that kind of thing, and I understand it completely, but I think from my perspective, what the fans really want to see the most is not necessarily DLC. They want to see the third part of the series as quickly as possible." And I, for one, am one of those people. It makes sense really that fleshing out and adding content to Rebirth would drive resources away from creating Part 3. However, I can also see it from the other side that some would like something to tide them over until it has been formally released. But then again, why have an appetizer if it's going to dramatically delay the main course? Hamaguchi would go on to state that, "So that's why we've decided not to focus the development resources on creating additional extra episodes for DLC at the moment. We really are putting all our efforts into getting the third game out as quickly as we can. So for the moment, that's where we're focusing our time." So in the end, while some may see a lack of DLC for Rebirth as a bit of a letdown, it's obvious that Square Enix seems to be going all in on getting the third part of the trilogy out to us as quickly as possible. It's a trade-off really, and whether you're happy with this approach or wishing for something to fill the gap while we wait, one thing's clear: the team is laser focused on delivering the trilogy's conclusion with the quality it deserves. Or so we would hope, but some, myself included, still fear this might not really be the case. While it's clear that they want the third game out as quickly as they can manage, we can also learn something else from this interview. Square seems to want to continue expanding on the story of Final Fantasy VII way past the release of just the next game. Hamaguchi explains, "I want it, Remake Chapter 3, to come out as quickly as possible and then move on to maybe look at some other stories, dig a bit deeper. There's definitely a call out there to see other spotlights on other parts of the world and the universe, different characters, so I'd like to maybe switch to looking at them in a different way after we've got the third game out." And that there, folks, is the part that's worrying me in particular. It's no secret that Final Fantasy VII is an absolute cash cow for Square Enix, especially at the moment. Between the Remake Trilogy, Crisis Core and its re-release on modern hardware, the questionable dirge of Cerberus, and the Advent Children movie, as well as the other media they've released over the years, the Japanese company have been milking this universe for decades now. And let's be honest, the original Final Fantasy VII already wrapped up its story in a way that felt complete. Sure, there were some lingering questions about Zack and the Nibelheim incident, but those mysteries were part of what made the game's narrative so powerful. They added depth and left just enough to the imagination. But then came the compilation of Final Fantasy VII, and suddenly it felt like Square Enix was pulling a Star Wars. Much like how George Lucas revisited the original trilogy with prequels and spin-offs, Square Enix has been expanding on Final Fantasy VII's universe in ways that sometimes feel less about answering questions and more about finding ways to monetize nostalgia. Crisis Core was a fantastic addition that gave Zack Fair the spotlight he deserved and fleshed out his role in the story, but Dirge of Cerberus? That felt like a bit of a stretch, trying to turn Vincent into a lead in a game that just didn't hit the mark. As for Advent Children, while visually stunning, and I have to say I did mostly enjoy it, it divided fans with its attempt to continue a story that many felt was already complete and didn't, for any reason, need a sequel beyond the quest to make more money. Don't get me wrong, I love Final Fantasy VII, we all do, but there's a point where it stops being about storytelling or innovation and starts to feel like Square Enix is squeezing every last gill from nostalgia surrounding one of the greatest video games ever made. And with Hamaguchi openly discussing expanding the Final Fantasy VII universe even further after Part 3, I can't help but feel uneasy about it. It's one thing to revisit beloved characters and stories, to explore fresh ideas or provide closure, but it's another thing entirely to risk diminishing the impact of the original by overexposing the world and its characters. Too much of anything can be bad for us, and Final Fantasy VII is no exception. You see, the problem isn't just that Square Enix might keep churning out spin-offs instead of moving on to fresh ideas like Final Fantasy XVII, for example. The bigger issue is what this says about the state of AAA gaming as a whole. Much like Hollywood, the industry is spending so much money on these massive projects that failure simply isn't an option anymore. To avoid the risk of flopping, they stick to sure things, sequels, remakes, and nostalgic throwbacks, because those are almost guaranteed to sell. And Square Enix appears to be falling down this very same trap. How long until it is the end of a new Final Fantasy stories being conceptualized before we just exclusively get expansions on the tail of Final Fantasy VII? Here's the thing, and I've said this many times before, playing it safe stifles creativity. Instead of pushing boundaries or experimenting with new ideas, we're getting the same worlds and characters recycled over and over. And while I'm excited to see how they wrap up the Remake Trilogy, I'm also worried that Part 3 might not actually feel like an ending. What if, instead of giving us closure, they leave it open-ended to tease more games, more spin-offs, and more ways to keep this cash cow alive indefinitely? I honestly believe that this endless cycle of nostalgia-driven content is something we as gamers need to begin thinking about more critically. Sure, we all love revisiting our favourite worlds, but at what cost? Are we okay with trading groundbreaking new experiences for the safety net of what's already familiar? Let's be honest here, none of us want another Disney Star Wars on our hands, and I fear this is where Final Fantasy VII could end up going. I don't know about the rest of you, but I, for one, always cherished each entry in the Final Fantasy series as completely different from the next, and absolutely adored the recent release of Final Fantasy 16, even if according to the statistics it underperformed sales-wise. I'll pin a Black Friday discount code for the new Steam version of this game in the comments below. I recommend you play it. I dived into this game head first, finished every side quest, and loved every second of it. The story was incredible, the characters were well developed, and the world they created was just stunning. I mean, come on, let's be real here. Whether you are a male or female, who doesn't love sexy, sexy Clive?
Hello, ladies.
Clive's arc, even Joshua's arc, Clive's relationships with those around him, and even the quieter moments of the game all felt immersive and memorable to me. Truly, in my opinion, the team really outdid themselves with this one, and I know I'm not the only person who feels this way and adores that game. Toggle the dog for the win. Over the years, I've genuinely loved all of the Final Fantasy games I've played, even the ones that didn't win everyone over. Final Fantasy X-2, for example, with its quirky tone and dress sphere system, had a weird charm that I still appreciate. Then there's Final Fantasy XIII. I know it's not the fan favourite, I completely get that, but I loved its ambitious world building and the intensity of its story, even if the story was a bit of a downer at times, with it coming across like everyone was slowly dying of magical Lassie cancer. I even really enjoyed 12, with Balthea being my favourite character, though not enough to join the husbando list. Sorry Balthea, my digital heart is with Clive. So when I talk about my concerns for the future of Final Fantasy, it's not coming from a place of cynicism. I'm saying this as someone who's loved this franchise for years, including the installments that didn't get the universal praise that I think they deserved. I love Final Fantasy, every single one of them. Not just 7 and 10, but 12, 13, 15 and 16 too. I love them!
Alright, chill out, don't have a cow, mate.
Something else I have admired about this series, particularly in the last couple of decades, has been how often it dares to step outside of its comfort zone. And that's exactly why I'm so hesitant about Square Enix potentially getting stuck in the cycle of revisiting Final Fantasy VII over and over again. As much as I adore the Remake Trilogy, as far as Final Fantasy VII is concerned, I want them to finish the story that way. Perhaps most terrifying, if we look around at the rest of the modern gaming landscape, we've already seen countless other development houses consolidating and only focusing on their biggest brands, ignoring all of their other IPs, whether they have a fan base or not, let alone creating completely fresh stories. Take Capcom, for example. Once upon a time, Capcom was home to a thriving roster of fighting game franchises that extended far beyond the juggernaut that is Street Fighter. Classics like Darkstalkers and Rival Schools not only showcased their creativity, but also pushed the fighting game genre in unique directions. Yet, over time, these franchises were left to gather dust as Capcom funneled all of its resources into Street Fighter. While Street Fighter is undeniably a cornerstone of fighting games, the sidelining of other beloved series created a void that many fans still feel to this day. Capcom has opted to play it safe, focusing on their proven moneymaker and leaving the rest behind. The results? A narrower portfolio and a lingering sense of loss among fans who craved something more diverse. After all, why make lots of fighting games when you can just release Street Fighter 6 and make people buy season passes year after year after year? Stuff like this serves as cautionary tales that apply to Square Enix and Final Fantasy VII. While the Remake Trilogy is spectacular and has reinvigorated interest in the franchise, the risk of leaning too heavily on nostalgia is clear. If Square Enix continues to expand the Final Fantasy VII universe at the expense of developing new ideas or revitalizing other parts of the Final Fantasy brand, they may find themselves stuck in the same cycle. Sure, it's profitable in the short term, but what happens when the shine of Final Fantasy VII begins to fade? Like what's happened with Star Wars, for example. As much as I love Final Fantasy VII and everything that it is brought to the table, both past and present, I can't help but feel cautious about where Square Enix is heading. The Remake Trilogy has been a phenomenal experience so far, but the idea of continually milking this one universe instead of fostering new ideas and taking bold steps forward like they did with Final Fantasy XVI feels short-sighted. Nostalgia is a powerful thing, but if it becomes the sole driver of creativity, we risk losing the very magic that has made these games special in the first place. As for the many existing in the Final Fantasy universe, as well as the rest of the Final Fantasy series for that matter, including the entry that includes Sexy Clive, don't forget about my affiliate links to take advantage of the current Black Friday sale to indulge in some of these games on the cheap. You'll find incredible discounts on tons of other games that you've been eyeing for a while, so whether it's a classic you love or something new for your collection, now's the time to snack them all at unbeatable prices. Click the link below to secure your savings, and don't forget to drop a comment sharing the awesome bargains that you've scored. Happy Black Friday shopping and happy gaming!